This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name's Nick Cutts. Hope you enjoyed Thos's coverage of this year's Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I'm sure he enjoyed it. He's going to have a couple of weeks off, and I got some very, very exciting episodes for you coming up within the next couple of weeks. Starting off with today's, you're going to hear a discussion I had with a wonderful young director called Lotte Wakeham. So I'm going to hand you over to that discussion right now.
I'm Lotte Wakeham. I'm a theatre director and I direct plays and musicals.
And I'm Nick Hudson. Hello, welcome to this lovely interview. I'm sat with the delightful Lotte Wakeham in her brand new flat, having a cup of tea. Thank you. I was drawn to your attention when I went to see Matilda in Stratford, and I heard this wonderful young up-and-coming director, and read about you, and I was incredibly impressed at what you were doing and what you had done. So I wanted to talk to you, and through various people, we were able to make it happen. So welcome to Musical Talk.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell me about yourself, Lotte.
So, as I said, I'm a director and I work on plays and musicals. I'm the associate director of Matilda and have been involved in that show for the last
200 years.
It feels like that sometimes. Just over 3 years. I directed the workshop of it before it went to Stratford. Then I was the assistant director in Stratford, and then have been the associate director in London and in New York, alongside doing my own shows.
You're probably sick of talking about this, but can I ask you about the workshops?
The show had various rehearsed readings over a number of years as it was being developed. And by the time I came on board, there was a full script, a full 2-act script, and the RSC wanted to see a staged performance of that draft with, I think we had 10 adult actors and 10 children, and we had about 10 days to put it on, and everyone was off
10
book.
10 songs and 10...
Everyone was off book, and we staged it, and they sort of did little dances, and after that workshop, it was rewritten a little bit, and then we went into rehearsals for Stratford.
And who was in? Was it the cast as we got to know it for Stratford, or was it?
It was actually our Mrs. Wormwood was Annette, who then has recently come back as she wasn't our Mrs. Wormwood in Stratford or the first London cast, but she recently came back and did the London cast. A couple of actors stayed. We had an actor called Pete Howe, who ended up being Michael Wormwood. The Matilda that we had, Adriana Bertola, went on to play Matilda in Stratford.
Who's now in Charlie.
And it was the first time that Trunchbull had been played by a man. In the readings up until that point, it had always been played by a woman. It was played by brilliant Irish actor who was absolutely fantastic. He was doing a show at the National at the time, and so a few people carried on being involved, and other people went on and did different things. It was mostly a new cast. We actually Mel, our librarian, Mrs. Phelps, she was in that workshop, and she has just left the show a few weeks ago. So she was involved from very, very early on. And a lot of the children went on to perform in Stratford as well.
They're now playing grown-ups in there.
Yeah.
Could you get a sense of something going on when you were doing this show? So something bigger than the sum of its parts, or something? Did anyone ever conceive how big it would become?
When you read the script, you just see how fantastic it is on the page, and to be able to have the chance to get it up on its feet and stage it in that workshop as a director made me think, this is, really, really brilliant stuff. It's always hard to tell until you've got the audience there.
The final collaborator.
Yeah. But it was clear that it was going to be... we hoped that it would do very well, because we really enjoyed working on it in the rehearsal room. And so,
but it was always just the Christmas show, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was a big part of its success, in that because it was effectively a small show in Warwickshire. Yeah, I mean, albeit with the RSC, there was a chance to be quite risky and to make choices that you wouldn't necessarily make if you were opening straight in the West End.
And also, it's very important to say that this is a public, funding show, which is always something we're very, very lucky to have in this country when it comes to new shows. I mean, you'll hear from Hugh Aldridge in a few weeks on the podcast, and he talks about, I've got to go to National. Well, I've got this idea for a play. Yeah, it's about this horse that grows up. Give us £1 million. And, the National and the RSC and all the others, we're incredibly lucky to have them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only through... One of the things that working on Matilda has taught me is just how long it takes to get a musical right. And it's only really through literally years of workshopping and development and going back and rewriting... like the famous Sondheim quote, musicals are not written, they're rewritten. I mean, that is Matilda all over, really. It didn't just happen overnight that someone sat down and wrote this brilliant show. It was a really long process of collaboration between the writers and the creative team.
Hortensia was a character that was cut or something?
Yeah. What is great about that particular team is how well they work together and how they just listen to each other and take each other's feedback on board, and everyone is very...
Well, Matthew trusts everyone on his team, doesn't he? Because they work together so many times. Yeah. He doesn't need to have arguments. He knows that whatever Hugh Vanstone does or Paul Keeve does, it's going to be, good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they all just want to serve the show. They're a very ego-less group. They just want to tell the story in the best way. And they're all happy to muck in with that.
But we've had Dennis on the podcast a couple of times, and he always says, and it's sort of the same with Tim in a way, but Tim knows about music, but none of them had ever done a sort of big musical before. So you had a very, very seasoned musical team, and then the writers of this show weren't exactly, they were breaking all the rules in a way. The song in the interval as such. And Dennis and Tim said there were arguments beyond you'd never, stuff you wouldn't believe going on and things. What are you allowed to say?
Well, I came on board, even though I've been involved with the show for over 3 years. That was relatively late in the process. So I wasn't really around for the first 4 years of development. So by the time I came on board, the script was... a lot of decisions had already been made about the piece, and it seems to be in really good shape. Certainly the character of Hortensia by that workshop had become just one of the classmates, rather than... She didn't have her big song anymore, which totally works for the piece. It totally
What was the song about?
It was called Now That She's Gone, and it was about how once Trunchbull had been overthrown, she didn't have any purpose in her life anymore. And it was a fantastic song, but the story needed to just keep moving forward at that point rather than sort of stop and reflect on this character. So I think it was absolutely the right decision. So
are there any moments in Matilda, either here or in the States, where you sit there and go, I did that bit?
Well, we worked... What was brilliant about working with Matthew and the other, my other associate director, Luke Shepherd, was Matthew gave us a lot of responsibility. I would say it was a very collaborative process, and he knew what he wanted, but we would work a lot with the children and the adults. Partly when you have three in Stratford and then 4 in London lead girls, and trying to get that performance even across those...
Uniform, but still different across...
Exactly. All of that stuff was really fun to work on, and Luke and I worked very closely with them.
So going back a couple of years to when you were in education, tell us how you found theatre and how you found directing and how you led to where we are today.
I grew up going to the theatre a lot. I was very lucky to be taken often. I was very interested in acting and school plays when I was younger, and knew that I wanted to work in theatre. And then when I was 15, I did some work experience on The Lion King. And it was the first time I was really aware that there was stuff you could do in theatre other than acting. Because up until that point, at school, you can kind of be in the school play. That's kind of it.
You're not going to have a staircase rise up from the stage.
But, I mean, you can't really... I mean, I suppose you might be able to be a stage manager or something, but there's not really lighting design or... Those other creative roles weren't so obvious.
It was all teachers doing it and things.
Exactly. And working on The Lion King just made me realise how the actors are sort of the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, really, compared to all the other people who work.
What were you doing on The Lion King, essentially?
I was shadowing different departments, and I think on my first
Shadowland.
Shadowland, exactly. And on my first day, one of the things I did was watch. I guess it would have been the resident director rehearsing the understudy hyenas, and it just made me realise that there were things you could do other than acting. And then a couple of years later, when I was in sixth form, there was going to be a school production of Arcadia by Tom Stoppard, and I really wanted to audition for it and used to hang around the drama department with my friend, sort of practicing our audition speeches. And then the teacher who was going to direct it was promoted and was too busy, and so the drama teacher said to me and my friend, "Why don't you guys direct this?" And we went, "Yeah, all right." Not really thinking what a huge task that would be, but that was the first play that I directed when I was 17.
So how did you get from there to Matilda?
I carried on directing in sixth form, and then I went to Oxford, and I was in a really lucky position to direct in big spaces when I was there. I think quite often at student level, you're limited to working in very small studios, working with small casts, and the university has a very good relationship with the Oxford Playhouse, which is a big theatre, about 600 seats. There are a certain number of slots every year which are given to students. You have to interview for them, and in my second year I directed Into the Woods, and then in my third year I directed the Threepenny Opera, and it was just brilliant to have that chance to work with big casts on big shows. And then after leaving university, I wrote hundreds of letters to people and started doing assistant directing, mainly for free. I moved back with my parents, and they were very kind and supportive of me.
Welcome to the arts.
Yeah, exactly. And started doing little bits and pieces, short plays and that kind of thing. I went to go and see Lord of the Rings, and I was in the habit of going to see as much as I could for as cheaply as possible, and then writing to the directors afterwards. I wrote to Matthew and said, via his agent, and said, "I'm a young director and this is my CV and I'd love to meet up with you." And didn't hear anything and thought nothing of it really. And then out of the blue, a few months later, got a call from his then associate director, a brilliant woman called Annabelle Bolton. And she called me and said, "Matthew's too busy to meet you, but I'll meet you." So I went, "Great, okay." And I went and met her, and she said, "Oh, we're looking for an assistant director for the Norman Conquests at the Old Vic. But you probably wouldn't be interested." And I went, "Yes, I would be interested." And that was my first West End assisting job, working with Matthew at the Old Vic, which was a brilliant experience. I mean, the plays are fantastic, and we had a brilliant company of actors, and because it's 3 plays, it was a very long rehearsal period, so I was sort of ensconced in the Old Vic for a few months. And
it's not a bad building to be in.
No, and I've been back several times to do other work. It's one of my favourite buildings. And towards the end of that run, Matthew said, "Coming up in the future will be a production of Matilda, and with the RSC, and I'd like you to work on it." And then it took another year or so for that to happen, but that's how it goes. So it all stems back to Lord of the Rings, really.
Did you hound Matthew during that year, or were you still working with him, or did you just ignore it? And
we sort of kept in touch. He was doing a bit of work on Ghost, and he was doing other bits and pieces. So, and I'd had some meetings with the RSC anyway, because I'm a lover of Shakespeare, and yeah, I mean, we kept in touch, and then it looked like it was all gonna work out. And it did.
Musical Talk.
Lotte, you're also a huge supporter of new works in this country. You've worked with Dougal Irvine lately, who we've had on the podcast many times. What do you think of the state of it in this country? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of new work, new playwriting and new musical theatre writing. And particularly working on Matilda has made me interested in the state of new British musicals. I think there's a lot to be really positive about. When you look at organisations like Perfect Pitch and Mercury, who are getting Arts Council support, I mean, I think that's really encouraging. And there's still a long way to go, but I think those organisations are going to start or continue really developing new voices. It was great to work with Dougal. I just directed a show of his called The Other School at the St James Theatre in Victoria, which is a lovely new space. And another thing that I think is really positive is having the venues like the St James, like the new Park Theatre, which are just a bit bigger and a bit more potentially commercially viable for a show having a musical, having that slightly bigger audience capacity. Because they are more expensive to do than plays, because you generally have a bigger company and you have a band and you need microphones and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think there's a lot of new talent out there. I mean, there are lots of theatres that consider themselves to be champions of new writing, but tend to really only focus on playwrights. And I think some places are trying to change that. I know Soho are trying to do more new musical theatre work. But I'd love to see more places, along with Soho, developing new musicals.
The National, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the National...
They do bits and pieces, but it'd be interesting to see what happens once Mr. Heitner steps down and who steps in and things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about The Light Princess. The National is the perfect sort of organisation, big subsidised organisation to be developing.
And the RSC, of course, as
Absolutely. Well. I think I'm really interested in the American model of developing work. And there are venues like, there's a brilliant Midtown venue called Playwrights Horizons, who every year produce about 5 or 6 new pieces in their season. And one of them is always a musical. And most recently they did a musical version of the film Far From Heaven. It was where Sunday in the Park with George started. I think it was where Assassin started. It was where Floyd Collins started. And we don't really have... I'm trying to imagine what it would be like if, say, the Royal Court every year produced a new musical.
Lovely.
Yeah, it would be nice. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, definitely. And I think what's really exciting is the model which the Go-Between had in terms of regional co-producers, ensuring that a new piece of work gets seen in maybe 3 different theatres around the country. And I hope that regional producers are able to carry on with that model. But certainly there are great writers out there. I mean, Dougal's one of them. I'm working with an up-and-coming guy called Matt Board at the moment. I directed a show of his called Ostentatious about 5 years ago, and he's got a new show called Fanatical, which was the runner-up in the Search for a Twitter Composer competition recently. So I'm developing that with him. There's a great girl called Susanna Pierce who's writing loads of just lots of interesting things. She had a big commission recently from the George Bernard Shaw estate. I've just commissioned her to write a show for me to direct in Singapore in the spring. And I think the talent is out there, and just we need more people to get behind it.
And the irony is, of course, it costs 3 times as much to put shows on Broadway. So it's kind of a weird... You'd think we'd have all the production houses here doing shows because they're cheaper, but on Broadway they seem to take it more...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an art form that the Americans are very proud of. It's the modern musical as we know it. They sort of invented that.
Some of us would disagree with that statement.
Well, I mean, obviously you can go right back to pieces like The Beggar's Opera. You know, there are there's a great history of British musical theatre, don't get me wrong. But the Americans have a real... What I found working in the States was just how much respect there was for it as an art form and for the craft of musical theatre writing, which isn't always seen over here. It's not held in the same respect often. I think that's changing though, and I think a great development is quite frequently having playwrights as the book writers. Dennis Kelly being a great example, and I think that adds legitimacy.
Billy Elliot as well.
Yeah, I think that sort of adds a legitimacy to musicals for some people who can be a bit wary of them. I direct plays and musicals. I just like telling
they're
good
the same thing,
stories.
aren't they?
Yeah, I don't see
You're
it
just
as
speaking on pitch.
Yeah, I don't
in a musical
behave differently really in a rehearsal.
I don't see why anyone should. Friends of mine say, "Oh, I said, do you want to see a musical?" No, I'm seeing a play. I don't. Well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're talking about Miss Saigon before we started, which is about to start opening. One of the first shows that gripped you, would you say? Yeah,
absolutely. I saw it just before it closed at Drury Lane, and it had a big impact on me. I was a teenager, and it's such a big emotional show, and I loved it. I really, really loved it, and I'm very excited to see it back.
Do you know anything about it? Would it be a small touring show, or do you...
I don't know a huge amount about it. I believe it's coming into the West End. I'm not sure quite on what scale.
It's going to the Prince Edward, so that's quite a reasonably sized house. Mary Poppins very easily. So, I mean, it was such a spectacular show at the Drury Lane. I hope that they're able to have some of that spectacle. I just don't want it to be all projections. I don't want I don't want it now with 3D projections.
Yeah.
Like, what you mean, a real set?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share your thoughts on?
I'm about to, as I said, I direct plays and musicals, and I'm about to direct a new play at the Arcola Theatre, which I'm really excited about, which is called Lizzie Siddle, and it's a new play about the pre-Raphaelite painters. It's by Jeremy Green, and that's going to be on at the end of... it's going to be on in November and December. So I'm working on that, and as I said, working with Matt Board on his new show. And
Matilda's just released 300,000 tickets, so
I hear. Yeah. So I think what's really exciting about it is we get so many young children in the audience, and it will be their first experience of theatre, a lot of them. And what a great piece to open with. And so that's great that more people are going to be able to get to see it.
Well, Lotte Wakeham, thank you very much for talking to us on Musical Talk.
My
pleasure.
We wish
you all the best of luck with your illustrious career.
Thank you.
We hope to have you on again very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. A very inspiring interview there with Lotte Wakeham. Thank you very, very much, Lotte, for talking to us. For more information about Musical Talk, please visit www.musicaltalk.co.uk or follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/musicaltalk or Facebook at facebook.com/musicaltalk. We are slowly putting past episodes on YouTube, so if that's a way you prefer to listen to episodes as you're doing stuff at your computer, you can at youtube.com/musicaltalkpodcast. Please join me next week, where we will be talking to producer, director, lighting designer Hugh Waldridge, mentioned very briefly in this episode with Lotte. Do join me then. Thank you very, very much for listening, and have a lovely week. Bye-bye.